The T-14 is the newest Russian tank. First serially produced hulls are being manufactured for the Russian army. It was developed as part of the Armata platform family since 2009, and Russia hopes it will usher a new era in armored combat. But various technologies and ideas that we now see in the T-14 were developed even earlier. Watch the video to learn how T-14 compares with modern NATO tanks. Tanks with simple radio in World War II beat better tanks without it. Communication in tank warfare is crucial, and it's crucial it is encrypted, just like your personal internet security. NordVPN is sponsoring this video, and they provide just that. Virtual private networks create a secure tunnel from your device to the end server your browser or your application uses. NordVPN reroutes your connection through one of its 5,000 plus servers. You can pick which server you want to use in which country. It works in China or in the Middle East. Its security protocol cannot be cracked even by strongest computers, as it uses 256-bit encryption standard. Use NordVPN on a Windows computer or a Mac, or on your iOS or Android device. And use this special offer. Go to nordvpn.com/Binkov and use the code Binkov and try it out. You will get 68% off a 2-year plan and an extra month for free. Click below the video to check out their rates. NordVPN gives a 30-day money-back guarantee, so go ahead. Back to our video. A Russian-made Object 195 prototype, designed by the same firm that makes the T-14, Uralvagonzavod, is a clear predecessor to the T-14. Object 195 tank is sometimes labeled as the T-95. It too had an unmanned turret, with a crew of 3 sitting in the hull, just like the T-14. Indeed, everyone first mentions the unmanned turret as the T-14's main feature. Some people look at the images and ask, why is the turret so big then? What we see from the outside is, however, just simple thin metal sheeting. The actual armored turret shape underneath is likely much more similar to the Object 195's turret. Let's take another look at that image. The important thing to note is that is a 152mm gun, quite a bit larger than the T-14's 125mm one. When looked at from the side, it does become apparent that the T-14's turret isn't very voluminous at all. It is tall indeed, so the gun can be depressed more compared to old Soviet tanks. Lack of gun depression has been one of the ailments of the older tanks. Back then, the low silhouette was paramount. Today, tanks must also be useful in urban settings as well. An enemy's precise guided weapons means focusing on low silhouette at all costs is inefficient. The reason for a wide turret are various subsystems located outside the armor. There are various sensors sticking out, looking both forward and aft, and active defense projectiles sticking out from below. The actual armored part of the turret likely looks something like this. The back part of the turret is also not very armored, as that's basically just ammo storage, like in Western tanks in their large turret bustles. But before we compare the T-14 with NATO tanks, how does it compare to Soviet tanks like the T-80 or T-90? For one, it's bigger. Uralvagonzavod's official data says so. It's thus apparent the design requirement was to keep the width similar to older tanks, but the tank itself is much longer than Soviet tanks. Indeed, when knowing the outline of the T-90's turret is armored, it's apparent even the armored part of the T-90's turret is larger. The weight was not officially disclosed, but there was a leak in 2019. The dimensions disclosed matched the official ones, and the weight was put at 55 tons. While that is more than what various media guessed, it's worth noting that all those sub-50-ton claims were without any basis. Indeed, anyone can do an analysis on their own. Images of T-14 tanks are quite numerous and of high resolution. Total track surface in contact with the ground can be calculated. When compared with pressure per area figures for Soviet tanks, one gets a mass of 53 to 56 tons, quite on par with the 55-ton leak. So why is weight so important? It tells a bit about 2 of the 4 most important aspects of every tank. Tactical mobility is usually defined as what sort of terrains the tank can traverse. If the ground pressure is too high, the tank is going to have a hard time working on soft soil. In general, the lower the number, the better, and 55 tons for the T-14 suggests ground pressure comparable to early M1 Abrams or late T-80 tanks. Western tanks have over time become heavier. While some small track changes have been made over time to compensate, the overall impact is negligible. Important note, in certain soils, the distance between wheels, size and number of wheels are also important. And also a bit of context. The Abrams A2C, previously called A2SEP V3, is the newest upgrade, which started to trickle into US units this year. TES, or Theater Entry Standard add-on, was a quick and unoptimized upgrade for the Challenger tank. Its weight after a proper upgrade might be 5 tons less. The Leopard 2 A7 is the newest variant available of the German tank. So, while the Russian T-14 is a departure in terms of weight when it comes to previous Russian tanks, the Western tanks have gone on to gain even more weight over the decades. Another point of comparison is power-to-weight ratio. Luckily, Uralvagon Zavod has publicly stated the T-14 has a 1500 horsepower engine. Using other known data, the power-to-weight ratio is thus easily derived. A 70 metric ton weight estimate for future Challenger 2 will be used. Speed itself, especially without context, is not a terribly important measure, but here it is nevertheless, as the T-14 maker made that public as well. The T-14 has both taller and longer tracks compared to previous Russian tanks. They're now roughly comparable to Leopard 2 tracks. Performance in traversing vertical obstacles and trenches is thus likely at Leo 2 levels. While previous Russian tanks had 6 main wheel axles, the T-14, with its longer body, has 7, like the Leo 2 and Abrams. Weight also indicates protection potential. The overall protected volume of the T-14 tank is still smaller than that of NATO tanks. If the weight was the same, that would suggest the T-14 has much more armor per volume. This video won't go in depth on armor, and we strongly suggest that you watch our previous tank videos for the basics. The frontal area is fairly similar to that of the T-90. The T-14 has a similar width, similar or smaller turret area and a somewhat higher body height. In all likelihood, the T-14 can afford to have heavier armor installed in the front. Now, the exact steel thickness equivalent numbers for the T-14 are not available, so comparisons can't be made in that field, only estimates. Our T-90MS versus Abrams video showed that it's visible the latest T-90 is already quite close in pure steel thickness equivalent. Clearly, the frontal armor values are 0 to 10% lower for the T-90 when it comes to turret protection, and 15 to 25% lower when it comes to the hull, depending on protection against heat or KP rounds. If one assumes the T-14 can afford 10% higher values for frontal protection compared to the T-90MS, the actual armor equivalents would be very comparable to the latest Abrams model. Whether the actual composition of the armor in the T-14 is better or worse than that in NATO tanks is impossible to say. There is simply no reliable information that is publicly available. The T-14 is using one generation newer reactive armor plates compared to the latest T-90, sometimes called Malachite, but that's likely an erroneous name. Armor is not the only means of protection. Modern tanks increasingly rely on active defenses. The T-14's defense system is called Afghanet. It uses radar and optical sensors to track incoming rounds and missiles, and then it deploys countermeasures, which include hard kill or soft kill measures. Very apparent are the big cylinders positioned around the turret, 5 on each side. Together they cover the frontal third of the turret's surroundings. They fire charges, creating a wall of metal that damages or destroys incoming projectiles. Evidently, they do not protect against all threat types, as their position is fixed to the turret and horizontal. While the sides of the tank may be somewhat protected as the turret rotates, in battle situations with unknown threats or multiple threats, it's not likely projectiles past the frontal 120 degrees would be engaged often. Another part of the Afghanet is an alleged soft kill ability, but little to no info is available on that. The idea is for the electronic signal emitters on the tank to disable the electronics in the incoming missiles. How well that might work is anyone's guess. Hard kill measures are usually limited to missiles or heat rounds, which are slower. Some claims exist that Afghanet can react in time to deal with super-fast threats like kinetic penetrators, but there is no evidence for that. Due to the hardness and weight of such penetrators, it's likely that even if Afghanet does react in time, the actual effect against the kinetic round would be limited. A hit to the tank would still be assured, but possibly the trajectory of the kinetic dart might be somewhat changed, impacting its effectiveness. NATO countries have been testing similar hard kill systems. Some 260 Abrams are currently receiving the Israeli-designed trophy system. The big protrusions on each side of the turret are quite apparent. Trophy adds another 3.9 tons to Abrams' weight. Trophy's coverage area is bigger than the Afghanet's one, but it can't effectively engage fast projectiles like the kinetic penetrators, and it has fewer interceptor chargers available. Leopard 2 tanks are used by many nations, so a single protective system is not likely. But future tanks may still receive different systems. It seems the Europeans are not in such a hurry. That extends to the British too. Their Challenger tanks currently have no clear plans to field a similar system. One of the recommendation documents for the Challenger 2 upgrades mentions adding soft kill systems, like ones that jam incoming missiles, but they do not mention hard kill systems. Given the quite slow production ramp-up of the T-14 tanks, it's very possible that by 2025 the US will have hundreds of Abrams tanks equipped with hard kill protection systems, compared to a couple of times fewer T-14 tanks. Protection is also not just about denying the hit or preventing the armor from being breached. Most tanks are engaged by high-explosive anti-tank warheads. Various bits of the penetrator itself and the tank's own chipped-off armor then fly around the inside of the tank as the armor is breached. Kinetic penetrators are similar in the sense that a metallic dart punches through and alongside it, bits and pieces fly around in a cone from the penetration hole, though the concentration of those fragments is usually less than with heat warheads. And when a breach is made, there's also a high air pressure wave happening inside the tank. Basically, the crew and other sensitive equipment will be hurt, killed or damaged in such an environment, especially if in the path of the fragment cone. But if part of the tank is unmanned, like the turret of the T-14, then even if a breach of the turret armor happens, the tank itself still has higher chances of remaining operational. The crew won't be hurt at all, and damage to the insides may or may not be catastrophic. The three-man crew in the T-14 is placed in a single armored capsule within the hull. While they can still be hurt if the hull is penetrated, overall the chances the tank as a weapon would be mission neutralized are smaller. The turret and the subsystems could always get repaired for some future battle. Indeed, Israeli experience with tanks has been that protecting the crew is of utmost importance. Even though a fair number of their tanks have been disabled in the last few decades, most were ultimately repaired, as anti-tank rounds generally do not cause catastrophic damage. Exceptions to that would be a fire inside the tank, and potential detonations of projectile propellants. Dangers of the latter were at times quite graphically evident with Soviet tanks. Due to the small size, there was little room for the rounds in those tanks. Crews often held extra rounds stored all around the tank, and not just in the somewhat protected central storage near the floor of the tank. Those round propellants could then detonate when hit, dooming the entire tank in milliseconds. The T-14 does retain central storage of projectiles and/or propellants within the central bunker in the tank's hull. A basic T-90, for example, has 22 rounds ready in its autoloader storage inside the tank, and 20 more around the hull. The T-14's load is not disclosed, but it's unlikely it holds less. The additional rounds are stored in the turret bustle, where they won't be much of a threat to their own crew. Most NATO tanks also have rounds stored inside the hull. The Leopard 2 has 27 stored in the hull, with 15 more ready to fire in the bustle of the turret. The French Leclerc has 22 ready to fire in the autoloader inside the turret bustle, and 18 more stored in the hull. The Abrams has 6 rounds stored in the hull, and 36 ready to fire in the large turret bustle. So the sometimes alleged big drawback of the Russian tanks being prone to self-detonating is going to be pretty minimal with the T-14. still higher than with the Abrams, but likely on par with Leopard or Leclerc. Challenger 2 has its rounds stored below the turret ring as well. For the T-14, given the blowout panels and crew compartment being separate from the ammo storage, the crew will likely survive even a hit in the hull ammo rack. Before we go on to firepower and lethality, let's address the elephant in the room. And by that, we don't mean the Panzerjäger Tiger pair. All tanks rely on various sensors to look around. On a modern tank, the commander has his own sensor mast, which can rotate around independent of the turret. There are various high-performance optics in there. The gunner has its own periscope and sensor set fixed to the turret. The driver has his own periscopes. Looking through those, he has the front half of the tank covered. He also has screens to rely on for added clarity, like getting thermal imagery or imagery from the rear-facing camera. All of the mentioned is basically standard for a tank like the Abrams. As one can notice, there's no direct line of sight anywhere yet. It's either mirrors in periscopes or various camera feeds projected onto screens. This is an image of the commander's area in Abrams. He uses various screens. Up above, there are some direct view windows. He can get his head up to take a peek, but those are simple, tiny windows, and realistically, in a modern battle, a naked eye without sensor help will not be that useful. Today's threats are engaged from distances that far surpass the usefulness of the human eyeball. The T-14 tanks have basically the same number of optical sensors Abrams has for targeting, driving and such, plus a link to video feeds from various simpler cameras around the tank. Kind of like a cross between the rear drive camera on an Abrams and multiple windows on top of the commander's hatch. The visibility around the T-14 is thus really the same as in the Abrams. Can cameras get damaged? Sure, if targeting sensors get damaged on a NATO tank or on T-14, neither tank will be able to do much. But they're more or less the same remote sensing systems with similar levels of protection. Whether it's a camera or the end of a driver's periscope, the looking eye area has a protective screen. If that gets shattered in a battle, the view through it will be pretty much ruined. That applies to a periscope or a camera behind the screen. Having one crew member fewer than most NATO tanks is a curse and a blessing. Less space needed means the tank can be made smaller and lighter. Fewer crew members to train is always a plus. But also fewer crew members out on the battlefield means repairs are harder to do. And for very quick bursts of fire, manual loading of the main gun can't be beat by an autoloader. The T-14's autoloader is probably quicker than the T-90's one, probably as quick as the Leclerc's one. But it will still fall short of the burst fire rate in an Abrams or Leopard 2. Of course, there are differences in round weights and people get tired quickly from manipulating nearly 50-pound rounds. So as the battle progresses, a human loader would get slower and slower. The Russians have been experimenting with 152mm guns, and NATO countries with 130 and 140mm guns, featuring even heavier rounds. So it's likely the future for both sides will indeed feature autoloaders. But for now, the 152mm gun is only a laboratory item. The T-14 is going into production featuring 125mm guns. Armor penetration is usually derived from three main factors: velocity, size and design of the round. Russian rounds were lagging behind NATO ones in design. Limited by an autoloader dimensions, previous Russian kinetic penetrator rounds could not be made as long as NATO ones. That has improved with the combination of the Svinets round and the new autoloader. But Svinets still lag a bit behind US rounds, lengthwise. Length impacts design and energy delivered onto target. A bigger caliber, like that of the Russian gun, usually means a heavier round, which is better, if the mass can be ideally distributed in a long penetrator. Russian rounds are usually noted as having weaker penetration, though with Svinets that gap has very much narrowed. That's perhaps also a function of the round's velocity. The gun installed in the T-14 is pretty much the highest power gun in the world right now, in serially produced tanks. The Leopard 2 has been using a long barrel to compensate for its somewhat less efficient round design by giving it added velocity. The T-14 went the same route, adding a very long, high-pressure gun. It's entirely possible future Abrams variants will feature a longer gun, but right now there are no contracts for such a change. Talking about gun rounds is a bit futile though, as info about the newest technologies is simply not available. So actual penetration values are impossible to attain. The US already uses a newer generation round than the A3, and Russia is working on its next-gen rounds, dubbed Vacuum. But verifiable info about those is impossible to get. Suffice it to say, both the T-14 and NATO tanks could very much punch through each other, providing they hit the less armored parts of the enemy tank's frontal surface, or if the distance is close enough. For hits into thickest armored parts, from 2 kilometers and over, the situation might replicate that of the late Cold War, when neither US nor Soviet-based tanks could penetrate each other. For details on penetration, we strongly suggest that you watch our Gun vs. Armor and T-90 vs. Abrams videos. Firepower is just one part of lethality though. One needs to find, classify and hit the target first. That's one area where previous generation Russian technologies were somewhat behind. That includes the T-90MS, with its optics and sensors that were a generation behind the NATO stuff. Sadly, there is simply no verifiable source to quote on details or performance of the T-14's targeting systems. Some improvements are quite likely, naturally, given that we're in the year 2020. Likewise, the US is working on the M1A2D variant, with further improved targeting capabilities to start fielding within a few years. Engaging enemies at a distance is a function of many variables. When thermal sensors are needed, the T-14 may be somewhat behind NATO tanks. In clear daylight, the tech differences are unlikely to hinder its precision at useful tank ranges, and hitting moving targets at a distance is not easy, even for modern tanks. The T-14, like other Russian tanks, will likely use its main gun fire-guided missiles as well, for added precision and range. While not as well suited against tanks, such missiles could still have an impact on the battlefield. Indeed, fighting other tanks is likely not going to make up the majority of combat time for either the T-14 or NATO tanks. There are simply too many other threats and duties to take care of, providing firepower to the infantry, taking care of bunkers and countless less armored vehicles, and even engaging slow-flying helicopters. Summing it up, the T-14 is quite a leap forward for Russian tanks, and in some regards it's more advanced than NATO tanks as well. Its tactical mobility is likely somewhat better. It also has decent range. The Abrams is the worst there, with its fuel-guzzling gas turbine, requiring more frequent stops to refuel. Being somewhat narrower and lighter, the T-14 may also enjoy somewhat easier transportation by rail, air and sea, as well as enjoy a tiny increase in the number of traversable bridges available to it. Protection-wise, it seems the T-14 should offer very similar levels to the top of NATO's offerings when it comes to armor. Active protection is harder to ascertain, but roughly speaking both sides should have that option too. And overall survivability of the crew is on the T-14 side. The Russian tank may be lagging in the lethality department slightly, with its sensors not being fully comparable in all visibility situations to NATO ones. In anti-tank situations, its gun rounds may not be quite as potent as US ones, but should be on par with European ones. But in overall firepower on the battlefield, there is really no lag for the T-14. In some ways, it's a westernized tank design for Russia, but also trying to go a bit farther than its current competitors. Too bad for Russia, its cost seems to be precluding it from production in very high numbers. It's thus unlikely we'll see T-14s become the mainstay of Russian armor units during the next decade. And remember, Binkov may talk about hypothetical wars, but only real peace can bring us all together.